Hi folks, good morning. This is Michael Pimentel with the California Transit Association. This is the fourth webinar in our four-part series with CALSTART called Zoom to Zero. Today's webinar is focused on funding the fleet, funding the transition to zero-emission technologies to meet the goals of the Innovative Clean Transit regulation. I do want to remind you all of the primary focus of the association over this next few years, and it's going to be focused on advocacy, outreach, education, and compliance, all with the idea of supporting implementation of the Innovative Clean Transit rule. Now, this four-part webinar series, much like the four-part series that we hosted with California Hydrogen Business Council, is intended to inform our members of the various technology solutions that are available to them, as well as the various funding opportunities that exist for making the transition to zero-emission vehicles. Now, before we begin our program, I am going to highlight how you can ask questions, because there's going to be a lot of good information provided to you today. You'll see at the far right of your screen a comment box that allows you to fill in questions and submit them to us. We'll be harvesting those questions throughout this webinar presentation, and then we will be asking questions during a Q&A portion at the very tail end of this webinar. Now, we've reserved somewhere on the order of 15 to 30 minutes for Q&A. I am going to note that one of our speakers, Tara Campi from CALSTART, will have to hop off our webinar after her presentation, so she won't be available to answer questions. However, if you have questions about the HVIP program, please do continue to submit those, and we'll facilitate some communication between you and Tara, make sure your questions are answered. So with that, we are going to transition into our first presentation, and that is by Tara Campi at CALSTART. She's presenting on the truck and bus voucher incentives, commonly known as HVIP. So Tara, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. I'm Tara Campi with the Hybrid and Zero Emission Truck and Bus Voucher Incentive Project. That's a mouthful, but you might know it as the acronym HVIP. It's administered by CALSTART. We are a national nonprofit based in California, and it is a California Air Resources Board program that's active all around the state. Next slide, please. So HVIP has been around for 10 years. It is a streamlined voucher program that is, its intention is to make the clean technology purchase process really streamlined and easy for the fleet purchasers. So the discount is provided immediately at the point of sale on a first-come, first-served basis. We have a ticker of available funds on our website, and as soon as a voucher request is submitted through our procedures, then those funds are immediately set aside for that approved vehicle. Also, the dealers are the ones who learn the voucher processing system and handle all the paperwork, so that provides fewer complications for the fleet and allows, again, for a streamlined process because the dealers are trained and experienced with the requirements. We currently offer funding for new vehicles and retrofits. There's no scrappage required, and over the past 9+ years, we've funded over 7,000 vouchers around the state. Next slide. This is a snapshot of some of the funding amounts. On our website, we have a vehicle catalog that shows all of the eligible vehicles as well as the voucher amounts that are available and dealers who sell those vehicles. But just to give you an idea, zero emission transit bus voucher amounts range from $80,000 outside of a disadvantaged community for a 20 to 24 foot, up to $315,000 if you're in a disadvantaged community and if you're getting over 40-foot hydrogen fuel cell electric bus. So big range there. And disadvantaged communities are identified by census information, and they are communities that are disproportionately affected by the effects of climate change due to socioeconomic and geographic factors. So that information is all on our website too. So you can look up your vehicle's domicile location and determine, therefore, if it's eligible for those additional funds for being located in a priority community. Next slide. The zero emission truck voucher amounts, 20,000. These are based on GVWR, 20,000 outside of a DAC for 5 to 8,500, and then up to 315 for a hydrogen fuel cell truck over 33,000. And again, the vehicle catalog on our website is continually updated and provides, as you see on this slide, there's a snapshot of the various available vehicles, and the catalog has the full details. There is some policy happenings going on with HCHIP right now. As of July 23rd, we are in a wait list. All funding for the current fiscal year has been requested, and a wait list is in effect. Right now, it's about 21 million, and that is shown on the ticker on our website. We are still accepting voucher requests as usual. Nothing has changed with that. However, they won't be reviewed or funded or approved until additional monies become available, which is anticipated to be in January of 2020. So we're getting close to the point where we expect to resolve the wait list and fund and approve the requests that are on the wait list. And we continue to post updates on our website as more news on that becomes available. Next slide, please. We also currently offer an infrastructure voucher enhancement. We offer up to $30,000 per vehicle voucher for purchasing your electric vehicle supply equipment. That covers hardware, load management software, energy storage. We don't cover labor or utility upgrades. And we have an application form that's just a pretty quick Excel sheet that gathers information about your project in order to get those approved. We do ask that they are requested within 60 days of the vehicle voucher request. And you can also request them for your waitlisted vehicles. There are policy changes that are proposed by the California Air Resources Board. They will be discussed at the CAR Board October 24th meeting this month. All that information is published by the California Air Resources Board on their website and also linked from the HCHIP website. So we anticipate that these changes would go into effect October 25th. However, this is not policy yet. It's still under discussion by the California Air Resources Board. So it doesn't affect any vouchers that are in play currently up until that date. So the proposed changes are to graduate low NOx engines from HVIP funding. So they would no longer be unapproved technology for new voucher requests, as well as graduating hybrid vehicles and hybrid conversions. Also, the infrastructure voucher enhancement would be discontinued, and other enhancements that we offer, such as warranty, extended warranty, plus ups would be discontinued. However, all of the DAC, disadvantaged community funding, will not be affected. That will continue as per usual. And also, it would reinstate a fleet limit of 200 vouchers per fiscal year. So those, again, are not current policy yet. They're under discussion, and we'll be posting more information and sending out more information to all of our stakeholders after that time. So I definitely encourage you to reach out with any questions, and if you are not on our mailing list and you want to be added, you can let me know anytime, and Jeff and Michael will provide my contact information so you can reach out about more information on that. Next slide. We do have a toll-free hotline that provides information for fleets as well as dealers and manufacturers regarding any questions about navigating the process or your purchases or any questions you might have. So thank you for your time, and I know that was a lot of information to digest, so feel free to contact me after the webinar.
Thank you, Tara, for that presentation. And folks, before we jump into our next presentation on the VW Mitigation Trust, I do want to provide some context for some of the changes that Tara noted. She had mentioned a number of items where ARB is proposing some programmatic changes to HVIP. Now, those are being proposed primarily for two reasons. One is the oversubscription of the HVIP program generally. Tara had noted that currently they have a wait list, and that's something that will be dispensed with when new funds arrive early next year. But then also, there's a recognition that certain technologies have moved beyond kind of the pre-commercial or early commercial stages and are now fully commercial. And I'm thinking primarily of things like the low NOx incentive, things like the voucher for hybrid vehicles. Now, I do want to mention, however, that as an association, we have discussed internally what our response will be to these programmatic changes. And one of the items in particular that you can expect that we'll push back on is the zeroing out of funding for the infrastructure, the plus-up that Tara had noted worth up to $30,000. We recognize that when it comes to infrastructure, all the dollars that can be made available should be made available for this purpose. We understand that agencies have enormous expenses that are on the horizon due to the ICT regulation and early compliance with that rule. I'm also going to mention, because it does interlace with the HVIP program, that we do have a bill that is currently on the governor's desk, AB 784 by Assemblymember Kevin Mullen, that provides a sales tax exemption for transit agencies that are purchasing zero-emission vehicles that are HVIP eligible. What that means is, if that bill goes into effect, if you are buying an HVIP eligible zero-emission bus, and this can be battery electric or hydrogen fuel cell, you can save, based just on the sales tax alone, anywhere on the order of $30,000 to $40,000 for that vehicle. The bill was designed primarily to address what we understand is still an incremental cost that isn't fully dispensed with the HVIP voucher itself. Tara had noted about $150,000 can come to you through the HVIP program, but oftentimes, the increment is on the order of $200,000 or $250,000 for your zero-emission vehicle. And we understand that the tax exemption won't cover that full increment, but it covers a much larger portion. And so if that's of interest to you, if your agency or your organization supports that bill, we would urge you to submit a signature request letter to Governor Newsom. You can contact me for a template for that, but that is something that has been a priority for this association and something that we hope will ease the transition to zero-emission vehicles. So thank you, Tara, for that presentation. At this time, we're going to turn over to Colette Kincaid from the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District to provide an overview of the VW Mitigation Trust. This is a pot of funding that the association fought hard to secure a portion of for zero-emission buses, and we're happy to have a representative from the Air Pollution Control District with us today to present on what funding is available and how you all can apply for that funding. So Colette, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Again, I will be talking about the California Volkswagen Mitigation Trust Fund. This is the section of money from the Mitigation Trust that was given to the state of California, or CARB, And CARB has chosen to have it administered by 3 separate air districts: the South Coast Air District, Bay Area Air District, and the San Joaquin Valley Air District. And we will all be implementing different bins of this trust fund, but it will be a statewide program. So regardless of the air district that you're dealing with, it should look seamless to everyone that it is a statewide program. Next slide. There are 5 different bins or categories. The first one is the zero emission transit bus, school bus, and shuttle bus bin, and that is the one that is being administered by the San Joaquin Valley Air District that I will be going into more detail today. There are 4 other categories: the zero emission Class 8 freight and port drayage trucks, and the combustion freight and marine projects will be administered by the South Coast Air District, and the zero emission freight and marine project and light duty zero emission infrastructure will be administered by the Bay Area Air District. The first bin, the zero emission transit school and shuttle bus that is being administered by the San Joaquin Valley Air District will be the first bin that will be opening. I will again be discussing that later. And then hopefully in the near future, the other bins will be opening as well. Next slide. So again, I will be discussing specifically right now the zero emission transit, school, and shuttle buses. There are several grantee reporting and operational requirements that are part of this program. There will be inspections on both the old bus and the new bus. We are trying to streamline that process, so it'll be a combination of inspections by the applicant, by the air district, or perhaps by the dismantler. But do expect that there will be inspections on both the old vehicle that is being replaced and the new electric bus. It is expected that the new buses will be, that are funded with VW funds, will be operating primarily within the state of California. The payment process will be reimbursement. So the applicants will, after they have their executed contract, they will go ahead, complete the project, and then submit a reimbursement request claim for payment forms, at which time they will receive a reimbursement check. There is 3 years of annual reporting for these associated with these funds, and it does require that an old bus and the engine or the vehicle with it will need to be scrapped. Because it is, again, a replacement program. Next slide. There are several things about the VW Mitigation Trust that are unique, that are different from other fundings that have been available in the past, such as Moyer. The first one is that it will be open to both public and private organizations. This includes private schools, private entities, non-government. All of those entities are available or able to apply for funding under the VW Mitigation Trust Fund. It is a first-come, first-served program. We are working with CARB to look at ways to perhaps restrict the amount of money each entity can receive in the first installment, mainly to ensure that the funds are spent across the entire state. We don't want any one entity coming in and taking up all of the money for any one bin. But the specifics of that haven't been fully hashed out or approved by the state yet. That's just discussions we're having. But we do want to make sure that there is enough funding and time available so that all entities across the entire state have ample opportunity to apply and to receive funds. The total funding for this category, for this whole bus category, is $130 million. The first installment of $65 million is what's going to be available in 2019 and should be opening within the next month or so, hopefully here really soon. And then in 2 years, we will be opening the second installment of $65 million. The intent on having 2 installments is so that we can apply any lessons learned, but also we do realize that some of the smaller governments and entities, they may need more time to get all the information together for the application or to get everything in order and to apply. So This will give them a chance to get everything that they need in order to see how the program runs, what the requirements are. So that way, when the second round of funding opens up in 2 years, they will have ample opportunity to apply. 50% of the funding will need to go to disadvantaged or low-income communities. Most are familiar with what these communities are. For the first round, we won't be limiting it. We'll just have it open, and then at the end of the first installment cycle, we'll see exactly where it all falls and to see if we have to make any changes for the next installment. Next slide. For the different classes of buses, for all of them, it's going to be to replace a class 4 through 8 bus, whether it's school, transit, or shuttle bus. And these all will be going to all electric or commercially available fuel cells. For school buses, it is up to $400,000 for a new all-electric school bus. For transit buses, if it's all-electric battery bus, the funding is up to $180,000. For a fuel cell bus, it's up to $400,000. And for shuttle buses going to the all-battery, zero-emission technology, it is up to $160,000. No more than 50% of the available funds can be in any one bus category. So for the $65 million, no more than $32.5 million can be in any one of these 3 categories. The cost of the vehicle, if it's a non-government owned, cannot exceed 75% of the funding, and for government owned, it cannot, of course, exceed more than 100% of the funding. You cannot stack the VW funds with HVIP funds or other CARB funds, but there are some categories that some funding that may be able to be stacked with it. But most of the funding sources that you generally use, like HVIP or other state funds, cannot be stacked. As far as the definition of the categories of what is a school bus, a transit bus, or a shuttle bus, we will be pointing to and relying on how HVIP defines those buses. Since most people are familiar with the HVIP categories of transit bus, shuttle bus, or school bus, this will be an easy way for people to be able to identify, not only because they know if there's a transit agency or a shuttle agency, but also it'll be very easy for them to be able to select a replacement vehicle and to know exactly which category it is, so they know how much funding to expect. Next slide. So this is the timeline as of right now. We are hoping to open the solicitation within the next month or so, and we are hoping to have the program guidelines, some of the program guidelines and the telephone lines and so forth open a few weeks prior to the solicitation actually opening. There will be an online portal where people will be submitting their applications, so everything will go through the online portal on the website. And then we're hoping to begin selecting awards and contracts fairly quickly to get these projects going. And then for the next 2 years, we'll go ahead and we'll continue to fund projects as much as that we receive. And then in 2 years, we will look at any changes that need to be made before we open the second installment of $65 million, which will be right around 2021 or 2022. And if you have any questions, I don't know if the slide has all the contact information, but we have been going through CARB's VW mitigation website, and we will be releasing a public press release when the program does go to open.
All right, well, thank you, Colette, for that presentation. Folks, we are going to now transition over to a presentation by Jordan Ramalingam at the California Air Resources Board to talk about the Low Carbon Fuel Standards Program. You'll note that the first 2 presentations address how to offset the incremental costs of your capital expenditures. This program is one that can help offset the cost of your operational expenditures, way of making charging a more cost-effective solution for you all. And so, Jordan, I'll turn things over to you.
All right, thanks, Mike, and hello, everyone. So my name is Jordan Ramalingam, and I am a staff member in the Low Carbon Fuel Standard program here at the Air Resources Board. And this morning, my goal is to briefly introduce you to the LCFS and then just explain how entities can generate credits for charging battery electric buses. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Okay, so just a quick recap of the LCFS for those that aren't too familiar. So this program started in 2009 with the goal of reducing what we call the carbon intensity of transportation fuels by 10% by 2020 from a 2010 baseline. And in 2018, the board, the Air Resources Board, approved amendments to our program which strengthened our targets and set a goal of 20% carbon intensity reduction by 2030. So if you look at this figure right here, this shows the annual carbon intensity reduction targets out through 2030. The idea here is that our target decreases linearly through 2030 at a rate of 1.25% per year. So fuels that come into our program and are certified with carbon intensities higher than the applicable standard in that year generate what we're calling deficits. And lower carbon fuels with carbon intensities below the standard generate credits. So compliance is achieved when a regulated party uses credits to balance out its deficits. And what this does is create a credit market in which the entities that generate the deficits buy the credits from the low carbon fuel producers. So we created this internal credit market that transfers value to low carbon fuels. Let's go to the next slide, Mike. Okay, so electricity is one of these low carbon fuels that earns credits in our program. And there's several categories of EV charging that can earn credits in the LCFS, both in the residential and non-residential applications. So for this webinar, charging electric buses would fall under the non-residential metered category. So the owner of the fueling supply equipment, which in this case would be the owner of the charging equipment itself, is the default credit generator, although they could designate another entity to receive the credits in their place. And credits are generated based on measured charging data, the amount of electricity that's dispensed. So a new provision that we added this year allows for matching of low carbon electricity with EV charging to allow for enhanced LCFS credits. And the idea here is that lower carbon intensity electricity would translate to more credits and more value. And one important note about LCFS credits from electricity is that these credits need to be used to promote transportation electrification and benefit EV drivers and customers. And we have a guidance coming out sometime in the near future that will provide more clarity on eligible uses for this credit value. Next slide. So LCFS credits can provide substantial revenue for dispensed electricity, and like Michael just said, this can be seen as an operational, to offset some operational costs. So this chart above here, this depicts two common fuel pathways. So the first one is the California average grid, which we have calculated. This is a default pathway. And the second option here is a zero CI electricity pathway from an eligible resource. You could think of wind or solar power. Those are two eligible zero CI electricity resources. So you can see the carbon intensity, that's that metric I talked about before. That's the carbon intensity of each of those two fuel pathways, and we would certify the pathway at those numbers. The energy economy ratio is a factor that we use to represent the efficiency benefits of different benefits, or even disbenefits in some cases, of different vehicle technology types. And so for a battery electric bus, the factor, it's basically a multiplier of 5 for your credits. So with the assumptions listed on the slides, we have a credit price of $200, which is roughly what we're looking at right now. Fuel efficiency of half a mile per kilowatt hour and 40,000 miles per year traveled. An entity could anticipate upwards of potentially 28 cents per kilowatt hour dispensed, and that's just for the California average grid, not the zero CI electricity, and over $22,000 per vehicle per year from LCFS credits alone. So, and you can do the math. If you drive your bus further, or maybe not as far as that, you can calculate what that potential LCFS value would be for you. But the point here is that the LCFS program can provide significant value for charging of an operation of zero emission buses, and it is definitely worth looking into. Next slide. So this slide demonstrates kind of the key steps necessary for participating in the program and generating credits. And this is meant to be more of a resource or a reference for you later. And these slides will be posted, I believe, at some point as well. So I'm not going to go through all of the sub-bullets today, but I'm happy to answer questions on this. And I'd encourage you to go back and review this slide later. But especially for electricity, this process is not very hard to participate in the LCFS. And there's 4 main steps here. The first step is to establish an account in our online LCFS reporting tool, which we call the LRT. Next, you would simply fill out a form to register your fueling supply equipment, which in the case of zero emission buses would likely be the charging equipment itself. Step 3 is where you would apply for a fuel pathway, so that we can certify you with a particular carbon intensity that you would use when you're reporting electricity dispensed to vehicles in the future. And I'll cover the fuel pathway applications step on the next slide. And once you have your certified carbon intensity, you can simply report electricity dispensed on a quarterly basis into our online tool, the LRT, using our reporting template. And credits are automatically calculated and generated by the system for you, and they are dispensed into your accounts within the program after the end of each quarter's reporting period. Next slide. So this is step 3, as I mentioned, is getting that certified carbon intensity. And this is generally the most time-consuming part of the process, but it actually can be quite simple, and there's several options here that are very streamlined. And so the green box right there, using the California average grid, that's definitely the easiest approach, where it requires no application process at all, because that carbon intensity is defined for the California grid. If you wanted to generate more credits using the zero CI pathway and it was applicable in your situation, there are a few extra application requirements, but they are minimal. The application requirements are all listed in this guidance that we have listed on the slide at the very bottom there, and I encourage you guys to take a look at that. It really spells everything out, but we would just recommend that you plan on applying before the end of the quarter during which your EV charging is taking place. And tier 2 pathways are more customized applications that do require much more processing time. And that would be the case if you did not fit into the zero CI category and didn't want to use the California average grid, or you were out of state. So we recommend applying 2 to 3 quarters in advance. And again, that guidance document that we have listed at the bottom goes through a lot of details on how to apply for even tier 2 pathways themselves. And that guidance also covers deliverability and additionality and timing requirements for renewable attributes, explains how to demonstrate supply of low CI electricity through options such as a green tariff program or other contractual supply relationships. So again, I really encourage you to refer to that resource, and you are welcome to send us questions about this as well. And next slide. So that's pretty much concludes my presentation. I hope that this has piqued your interest in the LCFS, and we strongly encourage you to apply for and participate in our program, especially as you roll out your compliance plans under the Innovative Clean Transit Reg and start adding zero-emission buses to your fleets. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jordan, for that presentation. Folks, we've got one more presentation teed up for you, and that's by Nancy Noble at ARB. We'll be presenting on the Carl Moyer program. It's been around for some time, but it's one of the other avenues for offsetting the capital costs of the transition to zero-emission vehicles. So Nancy, I'll turn things over to you for this presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Good morning. Yes, my name is Nancy Noble, and I am with the Carl Moyer program. In that program, I am a source category expert on both the on-road and the infrastructure funding teams. And I'm here today to speak to you about how the Carl Moyer program can help fund battery electric buses. Next slide. So what is the Carl Moyer program? The Moyer program provides incentive funds for fleets that are in compliance with all state, federal, and local regulations so that these fleets can reduce their emissions of harmful air pollutants. These emission reductions must be permanent, surplus, quantifiable, and enforceable. The amount of funds granted to each program depend primarily on cost effectiveness, which is the dollars spent per ton of emissions reduced. Specifically, the Moyer program funds reductions in particulate matter, or PM, NOx, and reactive organic gases, or ROG. Moyer source or funding categories include on-road vehicles, off-road vehicles and equipment, such as locomotives and marine vessels, and as a newly added feature of the Moyer guidelines that were released in 2017, infrastructure projects. Moyer funds are dispersed to local air districts who then select projects based on their own local priorities. Air districts also perform their own outreach and assist potential grantees, such as fleets, with the application process. Next slide. Moyer funding can help support zero-emission transit buses. Funds can provide for the replacement of internal combustion buses with zero-emission buses. Each project can receive up to a maximum of $80,000, but the exact funding amount depends on the baseline bus. In general, the older the engine and the higher the mileage of the baseline bus, the larger the grant amount. Moyer funding has fleet size caps or maximums. Each zero-emission bus can receive at most 80% of its cost if the fleet is 10 or less, or 50% if the fleet size is larger. Also, every Moyer project has a 15% applicant cost share, unless the fleet is a public fleet. Next slide. Moyer funding can also help support charging infrastructure. The following are maximum funding amounts for such projects. 50% for any project, but this increases to 60% if the project is publicly accessible, 65% if the project has a solar or wind component supplying at least 50% of the total generated power, and 75% if the project is both publicly accessible and has a solar or wind component. As I said, infrastructure is a new, back to the previous. As I said, infrastructure is a new funding category for Moyer. So far, districts have used funds for about 16 large battery charging stations, but these are mostly for school buses. And at least one district is funding electric transit bus replacements. So not many districts have done infrastructure projects yet, but we are strongly encouraging them to do so. Next slide. The local air districts are the best contacts for fleets who seek Moyer funding. please use the link at the top to find out what air district any city or any zip code is in. Many districts have their own website. If you have any Moyer on-road or infrastructure-related questions, please contact me at nancy.noble@arb.ca.gov. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Nancy, for that presentation. Now, folks, we are now turning to conversation with the panelists, Q&A. And we've received a few questions at this time. Now, one was directed to Tara Compy, and so as I noted at the top, we'll be sharing that directly with her, and we'll make sure that that questioner gets their question answered. Now, the next question we have in the queue is one that was addressed in part by the presentation we saw on the VW Mitigation Trust, but I'm going to probe a bit more beyond what the question asks, and then make a note on one other feature that is worth discussing. So the question comes from Jamil at the city of San Luis Obispo. The question is VW money stackable? They ask more precisely, can you use it as a match or in conjunction with other money? Now, we had heard that when it comes to programs like the HVIP program, stackability is off the table. But I am curious, Colette, if that same type of stackability limitation also extends to other programs that transit agencies often rely on to make these transitions to zero-emission vehicles. I'm thinking more particularly for programs like the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program or the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program. These are programs that fall outside of ARB's direct purview. Rather, they're things that are administered by CalSTA and Caltrans respectively. And I'm hoping that you might be able to address whether or not that is on the table for folks.
So as regards to stackability, it comes down to the fact that VW, like HVIP, the VW funds are claiming the emission reductions associated with the project. So you cannot stack it with any other funding source that is claiming the emission reductions associated with the project. So if you happen to have a funding source that does not require emission reduction to be claimed, then you could also use that funding source as well. I'm not sure what all those may be, but ultimately that's what it comes down to. The VW Mitigation Fund Trust is claiming all the emission reductions associated with that project, with the replacement of the vehicle with an electric vehicle. So it would have to be a funding source that doesn't require any emission reductions to be reported or claimed.
Understood. Now, folks, then I will make one additional plug for that legislation, AB 784, because one of the things that we were very conscious of as we provided input to the author's office on that bill is that we wanted to make sure that there was the ability to couple that sales tax exemption, which in some ways serves as a tax expenditure, for things like the VW Mitigation Trust. The tax exemption is tied to the eligibility of vehicles for the HVIP program. Doesn't require that you actually purchase a vehicle and claim an HVIP voucher. So in the instance that you go about purchasing a vehicle and are using some funding from the VW Mitigation Trust, you could also claim that tax exemption, which that tax exemption alone doesn't come with any emissions reduction requirement. And so that has the ability to, again, save agencies on the order of $30,000 to $40,000 per vehicle. And so when you couple that with the higher funding potential of the VW Mitigation Trust, which, for the battery electric buses is up to $180,000, that tax savings of $30,000 does get you far closer to offsetting the incremental cost of the battery electric bus, puts you at about $210,000. And so do want to make, again, an additional plug that if that sounds of interest to you, if that's something that your agency supports, that you do weigh in with the governor's office in support of that bill with a specific signature request. Again, you can contact me to get a template for that request letter. So the next question we have comes from Eric Eustachian at Riverside Transit. And his question is, could Carl Moyer infrastructure funds be used for charging stations for fleet relief vehicles or heavy-duty vehicles only? And wondering if Nancy, you could answer that question.
Yes, we do allow funding to be spent definitely for charging stations for heavy-duty trucks. Absolutely. Was that the extent of the question?
I think at this time, yes, but we may follow up with Eric to make sure that his question was fully answered. But thank you for that, Nancy. Next question comes to us from Peter Skinner at Samstrands. He says, in relation to the comment we just made regarding claiming emissions reductions, and I believe this goes back to Colette and your conversation about the VW Mitigation Trust, can't there be a way to proportionally spread the emission reductions across programs?
For the VW funding,
That's right.
Yeah, they're going to claim VW is going to claim all the reductions. So the full reductions for replacing the old bus and putting into place the new electric bus, they're going to be claimed by VW as part of the court settlement decree. So I don't see how that would be spread as far as like stackability, be able to be spread across different programs, because they're gonna claim all of them, if I'm understanding the question correctly.
Yeah, no, understood. And Peter, from what I know about the VW Mitigation Trust, it is something that the parameters of that program were outlined in a consent decree that was multi-state and that involved U.S. EPA, the California Air Resources Board, and VW. And so for a lot of the parameters for that program, there wasn't an ability to fine-tune it for what may be kind of practical realities on the ground. It was something that was set at a level that just fell outside of our direct purview. And so understand the comment that Colette provided, but of course, if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out and we can make sure that we get your questions answered. Now, I do want to return to the question I had for Nancy Noble just minutes ago. Eric Eustachian at Riverside provided some further clarification. And he asked, for the Moyer funding program, can infrastructure funding be used for non-heavy-duty charging, such as driver relief vehicles? So this may be fleets that extend beyond just your battery electric vehicles, other vehicles that a transit agency may have within their overall fleet.
Yes, we would fund such charging stations. The only ones we are not funding currently are residential charging stations.
Thank you for that clarification. Now, folks, at this time, we have no further questions in the queue, but I will pause for 30 seconds or so to see if folks have any additional questions. If not, we'll break for this webinar. So I'll pause and see if anything else comes through. Thank you. All right, so thank you all for joining today's webinar. We have no additional questions in the queue. However, I will note that this webinar, recording of it, as well as the presentation, will be available on the California Transit Association's website. And if you go to our front page, there's a tab for events, a tab for webinars. If you click through to that, you'll see the recording as well as the PowerPoint presentation. You'll also see copies of the recording and presentations for the previous webinars in this series, as well as for our webinar series with the California Hydrogen Business Council on hydrogen fuel cell technologies. Also, as part of our conclusion to this webinar series, you will be receiving a system-generated email from us thanking you for your participation in the webinar series. Included within that will be a direct link to where the recording and the PowerPoint live, and so you'll be able to access those fairly readily. Finally, we will be sharing our recordings and the PowerPoint with CALSTART. So in case you are a member of CALSTART and not a member of the California Transit Association, you'll be able to receive that information through CALSTART as well. So I want to thank you again for joining us for this webinar series. My contact information is on your screen. I'm our staff liaison to the Association Zero Emission Bus Task Force. And so if you have any questions about zero emission technologies, any of the state legislation that impacts zero emission bus deployment, or any of the funding programs, feel free to reach out to me via email or on my direct line noted for you there. And so with that, again, I'll thank you for joining this webinar series, and you can, of course, go to the Caltransit website to review any of these materials. So thank you again. Goodbye.